Now the uterus, the central median sac which is specialized for the development of embryo. Uterus is attached to the body wall by a broad ligament which is called mesometrium. Uterus is attached to the body wall by a ligament called mesometrium. Uterus shows four regions. The upper wide portion of the uterus, this one. Let us complete the diagram. This upper, this upper wide portion of the uterus, it is called uterine fundus. And the part which receives the oviducts, this part which receives the oviducts, this part is called cornua. This is the middle part of the middle large part of the uterus, which is the main part. This is called the body of the uterus. And the narrow region, this narrow region of uterus, this is called cervix. So uterus has the four parts. First is the broad part, which is called fundus, dome shaped part, and the upper corners of the uterus which receive the fallopian tube, this portion is called cornua. The middle large part of the uterus, this is the main part which is called body, and the lower part which is narrow and it is called cervix. And this cervix, it leads to the next part, that is the vagina. Now the uterus, wall of the uterus, it is very thick and it consists of a highly vascular wall which is made up of three tissues. The outer tissue, the first layer, which is called perimetrium, and this is the outer peritoneal covering. Then there is a middle layer of uterus, which is called myometrium, and this myometrium is made up of smooth muscle fibers. And there is a inner layer which is made up of mucous membrane, that is called endometrium. This inner layer, this is the endometrium, and thickness of these walls of the uterus, it changes periodically during the reproductive cycle, that is the menstrual cycle in females. And these layers or the wall of the uterus, they are richly supplied with blood vessels, and this is mainly the glandular tissue. So let us see the uterus, the womb. It is highly elastic median sac located between, this uterus is located between the urinary bladder and the rectum, that is a part of large intestine, and it shows four regions. The first is this broad fundus uterine, or the second is the cornua where the fallopian tube enters, the middle body, or the corpus, which is the main part, and the lower end is called the cervix. And this cervix, it communicates with the uterus. Cervix यूट्रस के साथ जो कम्युनिकेट करती है, देयर इज अ अपर्चर कॉल्ड इंटरनल ऑस. Cervix, this region, last part of the uterus, it communicates with the uterus by an aperture. This aperture is called internal os. And this cervix, it opens into the vagina by means of another aperture, and this opening is called external os. This is called external os. Now, the cavity of cervix, between the internal os and the external os, this cavity of the cervix. This is called cervical canal. This region between the internal os and the external os, this is called cervical canal. And the wall of the uterus, it is made up of three tissues. The first is the outer tissue, which is outer peritoneal covering called perimetrium, and middle layer of smooth muscle fibers, this is myometrium, and the innermost mucous membrane, which is known as endometrium. This endometrium, which shows the different thicknings, these layers, they show their thickness undergoes cyclic changes during various phases of the menstrual cycle. Now what are the functions of uterus? Number 1, it receives the ovum from the fallopian tube. Number 2, it forms placenta during the development of the fetus. And third, it helps in expulsion of young one at the time of childbirth. तो कौन से 3 फंक्शन हो गए यूट्रस के? पहला तो ये फेलोपियन ट्यूब से जाइगो ओवम को रिसीव करती है. दूसरा, it forms placenta during embryonic development and it helps in expulsion of young one at the time of childbirth. Now the next organ is vagina. Vagina, it is a large, median, elastic tube which opens at its lower end by another orifice, another aperture, which is called vaginal orifice. Vagina, it is a tube which is also known as the birth canal, and it opens out at its lower end by vaginal orifice. And what is the function of vagina? Number 1, it receives the male extromittent organ during copulation. It allows the menstrual flow and it serves as birth canal during the childbirth. The vaginal orifice, it is covered by a membrane, and this membrane is called hymen. Vaginal orifice, it is covered by a membrane called hymen, and there is a slit in the hymen, slit, or we can say a aperture in the hymen, which allows the menstrual flow to pass out.